Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, cats and dogs, welcome back to Kerbal Space Program with Jonathan. Today, we are in the spaceplane hangar, and I'm here to talk to you about spaceplanes, yeah! What I have been doing recently, past couple of weeks-ish, in the old KSP, is now that .25 has come out, what I've been doing, since we have the fantastically beautiful spaceplane plus parts, is I've been designing a couple of cool space planes. And so, spaceplane, this is actually the first iteration of the spaceplane that I was designing. Now, the design brief for this is I wanted a spaceplane that was very much like the X-38, NASA's X-38, or Sierra Nevada Corporation's Dreamchaser. And I apologize because eventually I'm going to call it the Dreamcatcher just because language is great. Yeah. So basically, what I wanted to do was design a space plane that could carry a whole bunch of Kerbals from the ground with the help of some rockets. Yeah. To space, to one of each of my space stations, and then dock with it and return the crew. Now, the idea from this came obviously from, as I just said, the X-38 and the Dreamchaser. But what was the X-38 and the Dreamchaser? Well, the X-38 was NASA's spaceplane lifting body design that was meant to be not an augmentation to the space shuttle program, but to be like a parallel addition to it. The on re-entry, of course, astronauts coming back from the ISS, from the International Space Station, get exposed to a lot of G-forces if they come back in the Soyuz, and quite often if they come back in the space shuttle. And so the design for the X-38, and actually really subsequently the design for the Dreamchaser was to create a lifting body building on the X-20 and the Dinosaur program, DYNASAUR, and I think it's the X-35. I probably got these numbers wrong. Basically, they wanted a plane that had the option of coming down from orbit, being able to carry enough crew and not expose the crew to high levels of G-forces. And the reason for that is that the primary reason, certainly for the X-38, much less so the Dreamchaser, is that if an astronaut gets injured on the ISS really badly, like they break a bone or something, well, thankfully it hasn't happened yet, then exposing them to high Gs, to like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Gs on re-entry is really bad for the human body, and doubtless it could potentially be fatal. So NASA really wanted to design this, and unfortunately the X-38 got canned because basically the budget just kept blowing out. Have a look online, type in X-38 NASA into Google, and it'll bring up what it looks like. It's really cool. So the X-38 was supposed to land on parachutes. They did flight tests, and in 2002 it got canned. Now the Dreamchaser, of course, on the other hand, it is still in development. It missed out on one of the last contract milestones for commercial, because of course the Dreamchaser, which has the same look to it as the X-38, it is designed. It's designed for space tourism and for crew retrieval from the ISS. And it's being, of course, produced by the Sierra Nevada Corporation rather than NASA itself, but it has to meet all these milestones to show that they can do what they say they can, and so that they warrant funding, and that NASA's going to keep funding them. The last funding round, SpaceX and the Boeing one, I cannot remember. Is it Boeing? Whatever the other commercial one is, they got the contracts, and unfortunately Sierra Nevada Corporation did not, which sucks because their plane looks awesome. The cool thing, of course, about the Dreamchaser is that the Dreamchaser is designed to come down from orbit to use, I think it was ethanol-based monopropellant, so non-toxic monopropellant, which is really good because the space shuttle's monopropellant is toxic. So you can't handle the space shuttle for quite some time after it lands unless it's have any monopropellant left. Yeah, so it's like quite hazardous, whereas the Dreamchaser's monopropellant is not hazardous, which is great. And the other cool thing about the Dreamchaser is it's designed to land on regular runways, which is freaking awesome. As opposed to have like the shuttle having a limited number of runways that you can land on because it's so big and it travels so fast and yeah. So anyway, so my brief, what I wanted to do was design a plane just like this, and this is iteration number 1. There are a couple of problems that I had straight off the bat with this design. Was I needed to keep the weight quite low, but I still needed enough fuel so that when I came back from orbit, I could get to the Space Center, because obviously I need to land on a runway, and there's only 3 runways in KSP unless you get the mod. And this one, although it performed really well on parachutes with landing, and a couple of times, I mean, this thing lands amazingly. And future editing, Jonathan, can you put in a couple of clips here of how this thing performed? And yeah, so this is really cool, but there's a lot of fuel in here and a lot of excess weight, and quite frankly, this thing kept running out of fuel coming back from orbit. So I had to devise a way of not having it run out of fuel, sort of stuff. So which was a good one? I don't remember. X38, no, it's X39. Oh yeah. Okay, so this is my final for their X38 or XK38. And I called it the Dreamchaser, but this is probably not my final Dreamchaser, that's for sure. So again, what I do is I flip it so it's facing this way to do all the attachment points, and then I flip it back right up and down for takeoff, which is great. So what's cool about this one is that, and probably the biggest innovation when it comes to this design was I decided not to use liquid fuel and oxidizer as in, the rocket configuration for spaceflight, because essentially it was adding too much weight to the design. So whereas the earlier versions of this particular plane design had this tank here was liquid fuel and oxidizer, it was too much weight, and with the Rapier engine on rocket mode, it's burning through the fuel way too quick, so I wasn't getting enough chance to come out of orbit and land. I'd used a lot of my fuel in the deorbit burn and then not have enough to get to the runway, which is bad for the Kerbals, as you can imagine. So what I did was I cottoned on to a really, really cool idea, and most of that idea comes down to these little buggers here. So these are O-10 monopropellant engines, and these are freaking awesome. Yes, that's right. They're amazing. So what they do is when you initiate these O-10 engines, like it says in the description, when the I'm not gonna do all that in French accent. When the O-10 was first, okay, it's just wrapping up. Basically, so how this works is that this engine responds to your main throttle controls, but consumes monopropellant. So obviously, shift increases its output, and control decreases it, and X cuts it right off, just like your regular engines, which is fantastic. And it only consumes monopropellant. So okay, and the ISP here is 220, and also so that's at sea level, and then 290 in a vacuum. And so what I was able to do was, instead of having this tank here as liquid fuel and oxidizer, what I was able to do was replace that with this having only liquid fuel, so that this engine here would only run on air breathing mode when I get back into the atmosphere. And all of the orbital maneuvers would be with these fantastic engines burning the monopropellant from these tanks here, and of course there's a little bit of monopropellant in the cockpit, which is brilliant. Um, I was trialing this and redesigning it, and it was going really well. And I was still a bit cautious about it because I had a couple. I had the earlier versions had problems with the wheel alignment and with the weight. So when I came to land, it had a bad habit of rolling over to one side, and problems ensued. But so I was designing this, and then something bad happened on my space station, and I'm gonna clip to that footage right now. Oops. So as you can imagine, accidentally detaching something attached to my space station precipitated an increase in impetus, that's the word, to basically what happened was I thought, right, no more pissing about. I'm just going to try this thing. I'm going to get it to work, and we're going to fly it up and rescue those Kerbals, which I've just left stranded in the new space station.